Good evening and welcome to the National Press Club. This is our 90th anniversary year. My name is Ken Esky. I am the chair of the Speakers Committee of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you watching live on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of upcoming speakers. On Monday, August the 10th, 3-star Lieutenant General Carol Mutter of the Marine Corps, the first woman to reach that rank, will discuss women's role in the military. On August 11th, Mark Russell, comedian and political commentator, will present Anything Goes. On September 8th, former Surgeon General C. Everett Koop and former Food and Drug Administration Director David Kessler will discuss anti-smoking efforts. On September the 9th, David Komansky, CEO of brokerage house Merrill Lynch, will speak. And on September the 15th, Richard Riley, Education Secretary, will discuss back-to-school issues. To purchase audio and videotapes of tonight's dinner, call 1-888-343-1940. That is 1-888-343-1940. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards provided at your table and pass them up to me. I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. Please hold your applause until all head table guests have been introduced. From your right, Alicia Pollock, student at the University of Michigan and summer intern for the National Press Club. Jim McTague, Washington editor for Barron's Magazine. Judy Pomeranz, freelance writer and art critic. Jack Torrey, Washington correspondent for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, my hometown. Ruth Conniff, Washington editor for Progressive Magazine. Michael Barson, associate director of publicity for Putnam. Gregory Gordon, Washington correspondent for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Skipping over our speaker, Marilyn Ducksworth, Vice President and Director of Publicity for Putnam. Jack Williams, an editor for USA Today. Theodore Rockwell, author, nuclear engineer. Mary Crowley, Group Editorial Director for Phillips Business Information. Edmund Silk, Financial Editor for United Press International Radio. Today's speaker, Tom Clancy, is one of America's preeminent storytellers. His novels, including The Hunt for Red October, Patriot Games, and his latest, Rainbow Six, have a lasting effect on their readers. Part of that appeal is their techno-realism, and part is Clancy's ability to weave familiar characters, notably Jack Ryan, into the reader's consciousness. Ryan, a CIA official, first appeared in The Hunt for Red October. Ryan became a large enough literary creation that the author's first publisher sought a piece of him, and the rights to Ryan is also a subject in the author's divorce proceedings. But Clancy has proven he can also succeed without Jack Ryan. Witness 1995's Without Reason, which rose to the top of bestseller lists. Clancy was born in 1947 in Baltimore and majored in English at Loyola College. He was an insurance agent before writing his first book, The Hunt for Red October, in 1984. The book was touted by, among others, President Reagan. Today, Clancy, who recently dropped a bid for football's Minnesota Vikings, is ranked by Forbes as one of the country's top money-making entertainers. Our speaker has a long-running feud with fellow author Christopher Buckley that ignited with a Buckley review of one of Clancy's books. According to Capital Style magazine, Buckley called Clancy the most successful bad writer of his generation. And Clancy replied, also according to Capital Style, "Sonny, when your paperback sales begin to approach my hardcover sales in, say, England, do let me know." Clancy's latest work, Rainbow Six, features John Clark, a character from other Clancy books known as the dark side of Jack Ryan, who conducts secret missions Ryan can have no part of. Rainbow Six is also a computer game with the moniker "Play as if 5.7 billion lives depend on it." Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Clancy.
Thank you. I wanted to start off by saying I want everything here off the record, but with C-SPAN Live, I guess I don't have much of a chance of that. Yeah, some years ago, Jack Anderson came down to do a videotaping at my house in Calvert County. And at the end of it, I kind of chuckled. I said, you know, Jack, there's one real difference between you and me. And he says, what's that? I said, well, Jack, I do good fiction. And he was man enough to laugh. I pulled the same line on an ABC reporter who wears somebody else's hair at Colin Powell's house a few years ago, and he didn't realize it was a joke. So I guess some of us do have a slightly elevated sense of importance. It's not a problem. I play X-rated golf, and Mr. Mulligan's a dear friend. I broke 80 once, but I flunked the drug test. On my computer, I have a document called Clancy's Laws. Law number 1: anybody who acts important isn't. And a political observation. You know, during the Watergate, you all remember that. That's when a Republican president misbehaved. And that was regarded far more seriously by the Washington media. I realized that when the Founding Fathers drafted the Constitution, they left something out that was very important. We forgot to carry forward from the medieval period the office of court jester. Now, the court jester would be a man who's seriously vertically challenged, who with a multicolored suit and one of these baton rattle things, and he sits in the corner. Of course, the problem in the Oval Office, there ain't no corners, but... And his job would be every 15 minutes to jump up on the president's desk and shake the rattle in his face and say, hey, you gotta wake up in the morning, go to the bathroom just like everybody else. You're not God, remember that. Look at all the problems we could have avoided in America if we had this institution. And I want to take this opportunity here now to propose a constitutional amendment to reinstitute the institution of court jester, to be selected by nightclub comedians all over America, just to keep the president's feet on the ground. Hear, hear. Thank you. So I guess you'd need blinders with the current presidency, but that's another problem. You know, we live in unique historical circumstances, and it kind of annoys me that people in the media don't recognize it and write about it. You know, the history of warfare, it goes as far back as humanity does. I mean, the earliest major war we know about was the Trojan War in Homer's Iliad, which was what in today's terms would be a minor regional conflict in the upper right-hand corner of the Mediterranean. Back then it was a big deal. It was a couple of Greek city-states fighting the Trojan, city of Troy, which was really a trading empire. It was not really about Helena Troy. She was a good-looking babe and all that. But what it was really about was that the Trojans controlled trade through the Hellespont to trade with the Scythians in the Black Sea, and the Greeks didn't like that, and they fought a war over it. It involved maybe 5,000 soldiers on both sides total, and it ended with destruction of Troy, as we all know, the Trojan horse and all that stuff. As civilization grew, so did mankind's wars. I mean, you know, Rome and Carthage fought 3 wars to see who was going to be the biggest kid on the block of the Mediterranean, which was a much larger and bloody conflict. The Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire conquered what was then the known world. They didn't know very much. They didn't have satellites yet, so that's the way it goes. And that brought relative peace to all of what today we'd call Western Europe, and North Africa and Turkey and Greece and a few other places. As civilization, as man's ability to organize himself and civilize large areas grew, so did the scope of the wars. In the late 15th century, we had the War of the Armada. You know, the Spanish fighting the English. And that the result of that opened the New World to countries other than Spain, and also established the principle of freedom of the seas. In 1759, in Europe, they had a thing called the 7 Years' War. Here we call it the French and Indian War. And that determined that the Brits were going to own all of North America north of the Rio Grande. Unfortunately for the Brits, the Americans who fought on their side in that war looked around and said, well, we did all the fighting, what do we need the Brits for? And there's only really one answer to a question like that, and so a few years later we kicked them out. Napoleon came along. The Napoleonic Wars came from the French Revolution, which was really an echo of the American Revolution in Europe. And that ended with total exhaustion in Europe and what, about 50 years of relative peace, followed by the Franco-Prussian War, which organized Germany as a nation state instead of just a collection of people who spoke German. And then, you know, the colonial wars allowed Europe to do its killing and pillaging and robbery elsewhere in the world, Africa, Asia, and places where the people were uncivilized, i.e. they didn't have firearms, and some of them were foolish enough to resist savagely, i.e. defend their homes, but they lost because the Europeans were better organized, had better weapons. The Industrial Revolution, in addition to transforming the types and amounts of consumer goods that were available to the average citizen, also created vastly improved weapons for killing. And they also gave countries the ability to take people who were heretofore involved in raising crops, in various farming activities. With the improved mechanization of farming, we could just release all these people and put them out in armies to get killed. So in World War I, we had the first post-Industrial Revolution war. Now, unfortunately for the soldiers in World War I, civilization had evolved to the point we could give them weapons, give them uniforms, and feed them, and transport them out into the field, but the communications technologies to command them did not yet exist. So essentially you had armies that countries could administer but not command. As a result, you had these enormous blunt instruments pounding into each other on the Western Front. And World War I for the combatants was probably the worst war in all human history. It was sufficiently destructive to European culture that it brought down three ruling houses: the Hohenzollerns of Germany, the Habsburgs of Austria-Hungary, and the Romanovs. And what was replaced, what replaced those three countries that were brought down was essentially scar tissue. Communism in Russia, chaos in Austria-Hungary, and a guy named Hitler in Germany. In World War II, humanity was down to three ideas for governing itself: liberal democracy, United States, France, Britain; German National Socialism, which wasn't really a political philosophy, it's sort of the ravings of one lunatic named Hitler; and Marxism-Leninism in the Soviet Union, which had a certain ethos and systemization to it, but turned out to be a bad idea, as we all know. The Second World War ended Nazism and ended colonialism, as the Japanese were trying to do. When the Japanese tried to expand, they were just doing the same thing European countries had done 100 years earlier, but because they missed the bus, nobody approved. Hey, that's the way it goes, all right? What Japan was trying to do with Eastern Asia was the same thing the Brits and the French did in Africa, but it was just, the bus was late. The Third World War, which fortunately was fought without major conflict, was the finals. Two political philosophies: Marxism-Leninism or liberal democracy. One of those two was going to run the world. And the Cold War was fought mainly by surrogates. And the wars that were fought were relatively bloody, but they were localized. They weren't general wars like World War I and World War II, as World War I and World War II were. And fortunately, for the most part, the good guys won. You'll recall in the late 1970s, America had this great malaise. The president told us so. Then in November of 1980, the American people decided to cure that particular disease. And we had President Reagan, who had the effrontery to call the Soviet Union the evil empire. Oh my God, people in the city said, you can't say that about them. Of course, they say it now about themselves, but I mean, Stalin, murdered upwards of 20 million of his own people just in the 1930s. He was more efficient dealing with his enemies than, say, President Clinton is. He just, or President Nixon. He had a way of dealing with his enemies that was decisive and effective, but not really nice, and certainly not in keeping with the American Constitution. In 1980, the Soviet Union had just invaded Afghanistan. They really believed then that they were riding the surfboard on the crest of the wave of human progress. Well, President Reagan got elected and decided to reinvest in the U.S. military, buying a lot of weapons. More importantly, spending money on training for the kids who use those weapons. And there's an old saying in the Navy: better good men in bad ships than bad men in good ships. The training made the difference. The weapons helped too. By 1985, the Russians looked at us and realized if we fight a war with these guys, we're probably going to lose. The final act was SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. And the reason for this is the Soviet Union was like Chad writ large. You could not drive 50 miles outside of Moscow and be on a paved road when you got to the end of the 50 miles. They couldn't feed themselves. When I was researching Red Storm Rising, I kept asking myself, why are we afraid of a country that can't feed itself? Well, they had a whole lot of weapons. They turned, and they looked effective. Really, they weren't. I've driven the T-72. It's a death trap. Our guys call it, in the Persian Gulf War, we call it the Jack in the Box. You hit it and the turret flies off, which is bad for the three-man crew, by the way. But we still believed the Russians were stronger than they really were. The primary reason they did have nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons probably worked. The difference between Russia and Chad was that the Soviet Union was bigger and it had nukes. The nuclear weapons were the only thing that gave the Soviet Union respectability as a superpower. That's the only part of their country that probably, possibly, might have worked. SDI would have invalidated their nuclear arsenal as a militarily viable, useful weapon. Now, Gorbachev came to Reagan. They used to clobber Reagan for not meeting with the Soviet counterparts. They kept, unfortunately, Brezhnev died, and Andropov dropped off, and Konstantin Chernenko was probably dead the whole time anyway. And the only way for President Reagan to meet with these guys was to do a seance. We haven't done one of those in the White House since Mary Todd Lincoln was around. So finally, Gorby comes along. Actually, I met President Reagan in the Oval Office, my first time in the White House, the day Gorbachev was selected to be General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And he had lunch with, President Reagan had lunch with Kissinger that day to talk about the new guy. Well, Gorby was a little bit more flexible, but he wanted to keep the Soviet Union a powerful superpower. And so he came to Reykjavik to talk with Reagan. And his principal objective was to talk Reagan out of SDI. He offered all sorts of deals on reducing nuclear weapons in return for elimination of the Strategic Defense Initiative. And Reagan just said, no, sorry, Mikhail Sergeyevich, but we're not going to do that. And Gorbachev went home. The American media reported the Reykjavik summit as a failure. But in fact, Gorby went home and talked to the guys in the Politburo and said, fellas, we got to change the rules of the game because we can't beat them as the rules now stand. And they've set the rules of the game, and we got to change our country. He started changing his country, and sure enough, communism came apart. And in 1991, the red flag was pulled down for the last time over the Spassky Gate in the Kremlin. And today, we live in a world, for the first time, absent the likelihood of superpower conflict. This is the first time in all of recorded human history we live in a world where a major war is exceedingly unlikely. Now, why aren't you guys talking about this? You're reporters. This is like an historical event. This has never happened before. Why aren't you talking about it? Moreover, this is good news. America's gift to the world is liberal democracy and peace. It's not bad for a country that's only been here 200 years. In 1989, when Eastern Europe was coming apart, that was the 200th anniversary of the Constitution, and the Warsaw Pact decided to crash the party. it was a big deal, but you guys weren't writing about it. We talk about, these nasty little situations in Rwanda and Burundi and the Congo today, and they're bad, but they're nowhere near as bad as the situation we had 15 years ago when there was this country called the Soviet Union with 10,000 plus nuclear warheads aimed at us that could all be here in a half hour. That's like serious, guys, like Major League serious. That's not around anymore. Terrorism, it's an annoyance. If a terrorist as I wrote the Sum of All Fears in 1991, if a terrorist comes over here and blows up an American city, that's bad, but it's a hell of a lot less bad than what could have happened 15 years ago. If terrorists blow up an airplane, that's bad for the people in the airplane, it's bad for their families. But it's a lot less bad than having our armies and navies and air forces in direct confrontation with Soviet forces. So, how about we pay a little attention to history, folks? America has done something for the world which has been a human dream for maybe 1,000, 2,000 years. Poets have talked about an end to war for a long time. Politicians started talking about it in 1917. World War I was the war to end all wars. They were 70 years too soon, but they had the right idea. America's gift to the world is we destroyed the most malignant political philosophy in human history, and we replaced it with liberal democracy. Russia is going to be a democracy. It's going to be a breech birth. The kid may have some birth defects, but they're going to be fixed. And Russia will be a liberal democracy. They're almost there now. Okay, it's a mess, but hell, so was America in 1820. And they don't, and America didn't, had a lot more to build on. We had, America is a child of the Enlightenment in England in the 17th century. So, anyway, end of speech at this point. America has given peace and democracy to the world. Let's give ourselves a little bit of credit. Do a little bit of this once in a while. I realize the media is not just like the kid in the oatmeal commercial. You're not supposed to like anything, but this is something we can be proud of. So, how about some questions?
There is a fascination these days with government conspiracies. Witness the X-Files movie. Are people too paranoid about our government? Black helicopters and jackbooted federal agents.
Jackbooted federal agents? We don't do jackboots over here. Paranoid about the government. That's largely Hollywood. Like Oliver Stone when he did his movie JFK. How a great vast conspiracy eliminated President Kennedy. And Hollywood still likes to say that. It was at The Rock, the movie with Sean Connery in it, as one of the #2 actor drives off in the end. Hey, you want to know who really killed Kennedy? The problem with conspiracies, guys, is really simple, and you're reporters and you know this. A successful conspiracy requires A, a bunch of people get together and do something really cool, and B, never talk about it. Now, if people had the ability to keep their mouths shut, you guys would be selling insurance or fixing broken cars, right? I mean, if there's anybody who knows that people have to talk about the crap they do, it's reporters. I mean, the bar in there is called the reliable source, right? So, a successful conspiracy is so contrary to human nature, you can just about discount it. Jackbooted federal agents, hell, you're talking about the FBI. If there's any government or any organization in the federal government I respect more than the military, it's the Bureau. It's a secular priesthood. I mean, the FBI, they're the guys who should have been priests, but they couldn't hack the chastity, and that's the next best thing. So, and J. Edgar Hoover originally, his original prejudice was he wanted Irish Catholics from Jesuit colleges in the FBI because no Irish American educated by Jesuits could conceivably betray his country. Damn right. We just don't think that way. Okay, we cheat at golf. That's as far as it goes. At least I do. But no, conspiracies are contrary to human nature, and that's the basic flaw of all that stuff. Anybody believes Oswald had help, or there was a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, I mean, you just go in there and have a few, have a few dozen drinks and try to wake up with a clear head tomorrow. Next.
Sometimes life seems to imitate art. In hindsight, which of your books do you feel got closest to actual events that unfolded in the Cold War or other arenas?
Oh, I really don't know the answer to that. Maybe The Cardinal of the Kremlin, in which Ryan's mission to Moscow was to save the Soviet Union from an internal power play. You know, in August of '91, when they tried to have that Paraguayan-style putsch in Moscow, Fred Francis of NBC News is a friend of mine, and a really knowledgeable guy in national security affairs, maybe the most knowledgeable American reporter in that area. Let's put it this way, I go to him for information. That's about as high a compliment as I can pay anybody. And when that happened, I got the word. I was on AOL, and I got the news that way. And I thought about something. I called Fred the following morning. I said, Fred, there's two things I want you to check out. Number one, about 3 years ago, Gorbachev, and this was in the Washington Post, like page 26, where they put the stuff that's not about as interesting as the bra ads for Woodward's and Lothrop. There's a little squib article saying that Gorby had canceled the history exams for high school kids in the Soviet Union, saying, quote, there is no sense in judging or marking our children's knowledge of lies. And I read that and click. So I called a friend of mine, Alex Costa, a gal who lives across the river, Soviet emigre, with a doctor's degree from Moscow State University. I said, Alex, is this as important as I think it is? And she says, you bet. Well, 3 years later, I said, Fred, remember when this happened? He said, yeah. I said, find out if the kids who got excused that semester exam are now carrying rifles for the Russian army. And number two, they just had elections in Russia. And as I recall, Fred, the company-grade officers in the Red Army voted mainly for Boris Yeltsin. Please confirm that too. And he called back a half hour later and said, Tom, you're right. I said, Fred, this thing's going to come apart, and it's going to come apart in a hurry. Because no child will ever forget being excused a semester exam, nor will he forget the reason. And number two, the junior officers commanding the troops who are holding the guns are not going to support the putschists. And, then Fred started laughing. He said, geez, you're right, they did do this better in Paraguay. And I actually wrote a column for the LA Times, but the coup came apart faster than I could get the thing published. So, as a result of that, the following Thursday, I gave it till like Saturday. It came apart Wednesday night. Fred had a satellite truck come down to my house, and so I could do some commentary on this. And the Washington Post, in its righteous wrath, asked why the hell a novelist was giving political commentary. Well, the reason was Fred was pairing me off for telling him that the coup was going to come apart. So, Fred Francis, in addition to being a smart reporter, is a very honorable reporter. So, yeah, maybe that's the Cardinal of the Kremlin alluded to that, and maybe it's the closest I've come to reality. Face it, you don't want the things that happen in my books to come close to reality, do you? I mean, not really. So, anyway, next one.
Speaking strictly as a writer, do you miss the Cold War?
Absolutely. No, I got 4 kids. I mean, look, my last real Cold War book was Red Storm Rising. That was published in 1986. Pay attention. I've done 8 books since then. I don't need the Cold War. There's plenty of idiots out there for me to write about.
Have you already signed for the movie of Rainbow Six? I loved Red October.
I'm talking with some people now, but nothing's been finalized. No ink on paper yet, so no.
Were you pleased with the movie adaptations of your books?
Next question.
Well, the next question is, have you started a new novel, and if so, what is it about?
Actually, I'm being very politically incorrect now. But I've never been accused of being correct politically. No, I haven't started a new one. That's like asking your wife right after she delivers the baby when you can start on the next one. You get killed, right? I keep telling people that writing a book is kind of like having a baby, but not as much fun. I just finished this one in May, it was May, wasn't it? And I'll start another one in due course, but let me enjoy life a little bit first. Maybe play some golf and break 80 without doing a flunk in the drug test.
Since you hobnob with military and law enforcement officials, what is the worst terrorist threat facing America?
That's a good question. The answer is I don't know, because nobody knows, because if they knew, they'd try to neutralize the threat. Now, James Adams, who used to be with the London Times, I believe he's with UPI now, also a very savvy reporter on security issues, wrote a book some years ago called The Financing of Terror, which I commend to everyone's attention. It was a superb examination of something. It was a book the FBI took quite seriously. And he contended in his book that the FBI has been more effective than any police agency in the world at controlling terrorism. Now the problem is, Timothy McVeigh was like one nut. And one nut with the right material can do a lot of bad things. And it's hard to infiltrate a group of one. Okay. Now you got these, these militia jerks out, playing Jeremiah Johnson out west. And the Bureau, you'll remember the Bureau was very effective infiltrating the Ku Klux Klan, for example. I once joked with one of my pals in the Bureau that they kept two sets of files on the Klan, the real members and the FBI members, and the FBI members was a bigger file. That's how the Bureau operates. They infiltrate and destroy. And the Bureau is extremely effective at this, and so the organized groups are probably not a threat. The one or two crazy people would be the threat, or a very small, the Middle Eastern groups are typically individual families. It's really hard to infiltrate a family. But remember, terrorism is more of an aesthetic threat than a national security threat. Okay, Timothy McVeigh blew up the building in Oklahoma and killed a lot of innocent people, and that's too bad. But we lose a lot of people in America in auto accidents and to drunk driving and to AIDS and various other causes. The fact that a lot of innocent people get blown away at one point is a bad thing. But does it hurt America as a whole? Only in an aesthetic sense. I don't mean to be cold-blooded about this. I've set up a foundation for sick kids, and I do things with kids who have cancer. I know how bad a thing death is. You attend the death of an 8-year-old boy. That's about the most unfun thing I know of. But cancer kills a lot more people in America than terrorists ever will. If you want to save lives, send some money to the American Cancer Society.
We're back to the movies briefly here. The Hunt for Red October was a very well-made film. Why do you feel it did not capture the essence of your book?
I never said that. I thought, actually, the director was John McTiernan. I thought he did a superb job. So if anybody had that impression, he didn't get it from me. I thought it captured the spirit of the film quite well.
We couldn't.
The book, excuse me.
We couldn't get through this without a mention of Monica Lewinsky, I'm afraid.
Dear.
Today is your appearance at the National Press Club and Monica's before the grand jury. Who is upstaging whom? But the question is this, the real question. What advice would you give the president as to what to do? Write a novel?
I couldn't put this in a book. Number one, Jack Ryan's not that kind of a guy. And number two, my editor wouldn't let me write it because he wouldn't believe it was plausible. One of the problems being a novelist is keeping up with reality. Art does imitate life. It's not the other way around. I got a button at a science fiction convention once that said the difference between reality and fiction is fiction has to make sense. Monica Lewinsky, a $50 dress from the Gap, for God's sake. She didn't even go to Neiman Marcus. That's an awfully cheap dress for what turned out to be a really expensive date. And I'm reliably informed that people are going to the Gap now trying to buy the dress. I don't know if with or without the stain. No, look, we can all have a good laugh about this, but keep in mind that we're laughing at the presidency, and that's an important institution. The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To the rest of the world, whoever holds the office of President is the United States of America. It's not a good thing for us. And it has national security implications. Saddam Hussein is now being an annoyance again in the Middle East. Maybe one of the reasons he decided he could do something is, the President of the United States got a little problem right now. He's distracted. He's not going to bother me. So things like this do have national security implications. They make America look stupid. That's not good for us. And we're not stupid. You know, we're not. You know, so the damage to the institution of the presidency is troublesome. However, remember that democracy is a self-correcting mechanism. And your job as members of the media is to tell the people what the truth is, and if you got the truth, you can take action on it. That's why, you know, the free press is more important to the maintenance of American democracy than the United States Marine Corps is. Because without information, you don't know what to think. Getting the information to the people is your most precious activity. And I just wish you guys would work a little harder at it. No, I mean that. I mean, look, my joke with Jack Anderson, and it was meant as a joke, you know, that I do, you know, mainly I do good fiction, but look, I've been the subject of various articles as a co-owner of the Baltimore Orioles and other things that were fiction. Things that were written down never happened. And 100 years from now, some researcher is going to be looking in an archive of some newspaper and think that's what really happened. And it's not. You know, a submarine officer once told me, it was years ago, a professional is someone who professes something. Think about what you profess. Think about the importance of getting it right before you put it out there. I mean, I know about deadline pressure. Believe me, I do know about deadline pressure. Okay? But you gotta do it. It's not a question of putting something out there because of deadline pressure. It's about putting the right thing out there as soon as you get it. Please take your jobs as seriously as the people who read the papers and watch TV. Please. Because we need the best information possible to make democracy work, and it's your job to get us that information.
Your books lend incredible insight into many different cultures. Where do you do the research for your stories?
Mainly in books, periodicals, and interviews with people who've been to various places. For example, I've never been to Iceland. A lot of people, when Red Storm, when Reagan and Gorbachev had the summit at Reykjavik, I'm reliably informed a lot of reporters were trying to follow Mike Edwards' path in my book all around Iceland. Well, I'd never been there. I just had a bunch of maps from the Defense Mapping Agency and some photographs and talks with people who'd been stationed there. Then the rest of it just imagination and, I guess, art. But no, one of my core beliefs is if you can read and dial a phone, you can find out anything you want in 60 minutes or less. And you're reporters. You know this is true, right? It's just a matter of knowing the right people and asking the right question and listening to the answer. It's not really all the... Research for my books is the easy part. Hard part's writing the damn things.
You mentioned the Baltimore Orioles baseball team. As a partial owner of the Orioles, how do you think they're doing?
Well, you all noticed a turnaround since the All-Star break, and I guess I can say this now. We went to Professor Patrick Walsh at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and he prescribed Viagra for the whole team. And it also helps you swing a bat, guys. And so we've discovered another application for this wonderful new medication.
Have you ever considered buying out Peter Angelos, the principal owner of the Orioles?
Pete's a lawyer. He's got more money than I got. No, I don't think that's going to happen. Peter Angelos is my partner and my friend, a man of the most intense personal honor and integrity, and I'm honored to have him as a partner and a friend.
What happened to the Minnesota Vikings deal?
It just didn't work out, and there's no sense in elaborating on it. It just didn't work out, and sometimes that happens in business. That's the way it goes. And I don't take it. You know, I'm sad it didn't happen, but you know, I set up this organization for sick kids. It's called the Kyle Foundation. It's named for a little boy named Kyle Haydock I got to know in 1990, who died on August the 1st, 1991, at the ripe old age of 8 years and 26 days. That's one of the unfun things I do. And one of the things I learned from that experience, if it isn't life and death, it's no big deal. You know, money is something you can earn and spend and have fun with, but life and death is a really important commodity we deal with.
If you could change anything in any book, what would it be?
Not a thing. No, honestly, I wish I'd been a better writer 15 years ago when I did Red October, but your skill at doing anything improves with practice. I'm a better writer now than I was. Am I as good as I would like to be? Of course not. I don't think anybody is, even Freddie Forsyth, who's the best writer, qua writer in the thriller business, and a friend of mine. You're never as good as you want to be, but you just have to accept what you did. As terms of storytelling, I think I'm pretty good. My use of language, there's always room for improvement. I keep trying to improve.
How did you become a full-time novelist? Didn't it take a lot of courage?
No, mainly it was boredom. You know, I was an insurance agent, and it was just not intellectually satisfying. And since high school, I wanted to see my name on the cover of a book. That's the only reason I wrote Red October. I wanted to see Tom Clancy on the, thank God it's just Tom Clancy, not Thomas L. Clancy Jr. Otherwise, I'd never finish the damn signings. But I just wanted to see my name on the cover of a book, and I published Red October, and I got very lucky. Luck counts.
What do you consider to be the best book you have written, and why?
I don't answer that question in public because your books are all children of your mind, and you don't choose between your kids. I mean, I got 4 kids, I don't choose between them. And I've got 10 novels, I don't choose between them either, because they're children of up here.
Well, we're back to the movies here for a minute. Do you like the way in which Harrison Ford plays Jack Ryan? If not, what actor would you like to see play Jack?
Well, the public likes Harrison Ford, so who am I to say no?
In the Jack Ryan series of stories, did you plan and write each story as an author in segments, book by book, or did you imagine all of Jack Ryan's life and find a way to break it up into each book?
When I started playing with the Ryan character back in, I guess, about 1978 or so, and I started playing with the idea of Patriot games. The books have been published in the order of their completion, but I've been thinking about various things for a very long time. I got 3, I call them sketches on my computer now, of books I may or may not write. No, I didn't think about taking Ryan as far as he is now back in the 70s or 80s, but as he grew, so did my ambitions for him. And it was just, you know, when I got the Debt of Honor, I thought maybe it might be fun to make him president. And the story about that, by the way, is when I was in college, a senior at Loyola College, I was president of the chess club, and I had my own office. That's a great thing to have as a college student. It wasn't, I mean, it was the size of a broom closet, but it was mine, by God. It had a... And somebody came into my office and said, how do you destroy the whole U.S. government? And we decided that using nuclear weapons was cheating. So it took me about a half hour to figure out the best way to destroy the whole government. And the idea never went away. And at the end of Debt of Honor, I decided to implement it. But I didn't write it without first discussing it with the Air Force. And it was 10 years ago, I was giving a speech at Andrews Air Force Base. And afterwards, I was drinking a glass of wine with a 2-star whose job was to supervise Continental Air Defense, which is mainly a function of the Air National Guard. And I laid this proposal on him, and he got real quiet, and his eyes got pretty wide. And I said, well, you know, General, this is the idea I'm going to put in the book someday, and I guess you guys got to have a plan for it. And he said, you know, Tom, if I did have a plan for it, I wouldn't be able to tell you because it would be classified. But since we don't, I can tell you, to the best of my knowledge, we've never thought about this. But I promise you, Monday morning, my staff is going to be looking at this problem. Well, to the best of my knowledge, they still don't have a plan for it. But I guess they've thought about it and decided it's not a credible threat. In Korea, for example, they always have 8 F-16s aloft. One flight is between Seoul and the DMZ, and the other one's directly over Seoul to guard against a possible attack from the north. But since America's got oceans on both sides, we don't think about that. Is it plausible? It's plausible as hell. Trust me. The way that Captain Sato brought his 747 into the Capitol building is only one of 2 ways to take the whole government out. The real fun way is to do it at an inauguration, where you really wipe out the whole command and control. Because the moment the president's inaugurated, all the old cabinet members are gone, and the new ones aren't installed yet. So the whole chain of command for the whole U.S. government is in one place and vulnerable as hell. So I mean, if you really want to be nasty, that's the way to do it. But taking them out of the joint session of Congress was almost as much fun. That is a plausible threat, and I wish we'd pay a little bit of attention to it because it's not all that hard to hijack an airplane.
I admire Jack Ryan, but I would not vote for his re-election.
Why?
Is he reactionary or just moderately conservative?
John Patrick Ryan is a registered independent, a member of no party, and his only ideology is things that work. You know, a good idea is an idea that works, a bad idea is an idea that doesn't work. There are a lot of bad ideas that look good and fail. Welfare. Welfare has been a disaster for America. It's wrecked black America. It's done things, welfare has done things to black America the Ku Klux Klan couldn't have done on his best sheet-headed day. I mean, it was an attempt to do good that miscarried, and miscarried very badly, and unfortunately, people in the government who promote the idea, a politician, I say this in executive orders, a politician would rather face bayonets than admit that he had a bad idea. Okay, a politician would do almost anything rather than admit error, which is going to be one of the problems for President Clinton in the next couple of weeks. I mean, it's very hard for a politician to admit error. They think it makes them look weak. In fact, it makes them look honest. But since honesty is so divorced from the political mentality, it just doesn't occur to them. Personally, I found that admitting error is one of the most disarming things you can do. And so when I screw up, I've never been bashful about saying, oops, I goofed on that one and I'm sorry. You know, and Ryan's ideology is find things that work and use them. Does that make him conservative? I guess some people would think so. Reactionary, no.
What was the basis for Jack Ryan? Where'd he come from?
Ryan is the new improved version of me, and he doesn't wear glasses. And he gets into some of the damnedest situations, because you know, my theory of drama comes from something I saw on PBS back in the mid-'70s. It was a 9-minute special on Alfred Hitchcock. And all of a sudden I realized what Hitchcock did was he took an ordinary guy, usually Jimmy Stewart or Cary Grant, and just dropped him in the middle of something I can't say with ladies present, and said, okay, either swim out or drown. And of course Jimmy Stewart or Cary Grant always swim out. Well, that's what I keep doing with Ryan. I just dump him in the middle of a problem and say, survive, and he tries to survive. So, yeah, but look, I've been doing this character for really over 20 years since I started thinking about him. And you can't stick with one character that long without putting a lot of yourself into him. So it's inevitable, really. Would you vote for me for president?
A little different subject here. Would you ever consider writing a novel concerning the extreme danger and ramifications of the undue influence of the mainland Chinese government?
Well, you know, the PRC has been the sort of the unnamed bad guy in the last 2 novels. The People's Republic of China is the last Stalinist, semi-Stalinist government in the world. You know, when we saw what they did in Tiananmen Square, you know, I think, from my perspective, the proudest moment in the history of the American visual media, certainly, was what Bernie Shaw did. And there's a great story about Bernie. He told me, we shut down a bar one night at the Waldorf in New York, and this Chinese cop came strolling into his office where he had the camera set up and they're taking the pictures. And he said, you have an order from, you know, you have to shut everything down. And Bernie said, okay, where's the written order? And the Chinese cop goes, huh? He says, look, I have to have an order in writing before I can turn the cameras off. If you get me that, fine, I'll do it. He read the communist mind so brilliant. I mean, this is rising to an occasion better than anybody does in one of my books. And this Chinese cop went back to his precinct, and they probably bumped it up a few levels to get a written order to shut the cameras off. Meanwhile, Bernie's covering the news and covering something better than any American TV reporter ever did it in history, as far as I'm concerned. That was a damn proud moment for the journalistic profession, showing the people what was going on in Beijing. So I think that do I think they're bad guys? Yeah. Do I think they're going to survive? No. Why? It's real simple. If there's anything America has proven to the world, it's that people are the same. You know, people in America from Africa, Asia, Northern Europe, everywhere. They come here, second generation, they're doctors, and they got somebody in the house. All right? That's the magic of America. The only difference between America and the rest of the world is the Constitution. It's a set of rules, shorter than the rules of golf, by the way, considerably. That's what makes us special, is we have, the guys that draft the Constitution, maybe they were divinely inspired, I don't know. But they set up a political system that allows people to chase after their own dreams to the extent of their own talents. And so we've proven that people from all over the world thrive in this environment. Race, culture, religion has nothing to do with it. Whether you go to a mosque or you read Confucius, it doesn't matter. Come to America, you can do okay. Fine. Now, if that's true, then China's going to have to change. Otherwise, they just can't keep up with us. The reason the Soviet Union came apart is not that we threw a lot of nuclear weapons at them, but because we showed them they couldn't compete economically with us. And a nation's economy is the foundation of its military strength. We put better weapons out there because we pay people to, we invented the transistor here. We invented the computer here. Those are dangerous things if you hook them up to gadgets that go bang when you pull a trigger. The China has to change to a liberal democracy sooner or later because otherwise they will fall behind. And the leaders of that country don't want it to fall behind. And so the dilemma for the communist leadership over there is, well, we want to have a country that's economically free and innovative, and so we're going to try to liberalize the economy, but you can't separate the economy from the political structure. The guy who's running a big company is going to say, hey, I can make all this money, and I'm smarter than bozo in Beijing. Why doesn't he listen to me? Sooner or later, the bozo in Beijing has to listen to him. It's that simple.
Could you comment on U.S. policy toward Iraq and specifically Saddam Hussein? Have we been aggressive enough?
Oh, probably not. We should have taken the bastard out back in 1991 when we had the chance, but that was a political decision, and war is a political act, and it's governed by politicians. At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Correcting a mistake like that, years later, can be very difficult. Probably the smartest thing to do is just start broadcasting into Iraq and say, look, guys, the reason you don't have enough food and medications, it's not us. We'd love to sell them to you. Got this jerk running your country who makes it impossible for us to do so. You're not our prisoner. You're his prisoner. Deal with it. And sooner or later, somebody's going to pick up a gun and blow his brains out. I did that in executive orders, by the way.
What are your views as to nuclear proliferation in Asia?
It's not good. Nuclear weapons are like dangerous things, for those of you who haven't noticed. And we want to keep the nuclear club as small as possible. I mean, I'd be perfectly content if we got rid of the damn things entirely, but you can't uninvent something. Just like you cannot classify the laws of nature. As soon as we proved it was possible to build a nuke, the Russians had one 4 years later, despite predictions from our scientific community that would take them 20 years. Well, they knew it was, if you know something's possible, you can work a lot more intelligently on it than, if you think you're just speculating whether it's possible or not. The good news is they're not terribly efficient. At least 2 of the Pakistani weapons were fizzles and didn't go off. Did anybody here know that? Well, I found out. Okay, good. Somebody found out. One of the things we could tell both countries is if you toss one of those nukes, then we'll do the same thing and turn your capital city into a parking lot. A message to be delivered quietly by the U.S. ambassador and to smile when he does so. But just say, okay, you got nukes, that's fine, don't use them, or something really bad's going to happen. That's called deterrence. It kept the peace for 40 years, and maybe it'll help in the future.
You said earlier that nuclear tensions have abated. This person asks, a great deal of your books deal heavily with nuclear tensions. What is your belief on the future of nuclear tensions?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that. Nuclear tensions between the United States and Russia, I think, are zero, or effectively zero. Is there any likely scenario which would cause nuclear war between the United States and another country? Not that I know of. So, I have trouble predicting, what such tensions would be. Go ahead.
Well, here's a person that wants to know, if America is for peace throughout the world, why do we still have weapons of mass destruction?
Yeah, I published a column in the LA Times about 4 or 5 years ago suggesting the total elimination of ballistic delivery systems. We can still have, stealth bombers that drop B-61 and B-83 gravity bombs, which will do a number on anything you drop them on. But I've never liked ballistic systems because they're just too easy to use. They're like words and bullets. You can't call them back. And they only take 30 minutes to get from point A to point B. This is not something that we need to have. So, so I proposed some years ago just a total elimination of ballistic delivery systems. Nobody listens.
Well, Mr. Clancy, before asking the final question, I have a few gifts for you here.
Okay.
One is a certificate of appreciation for being here this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Another is the history of the National Press Club, called Reliable Sources.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. And finally, we have the chalice of the National Press Club, our coffee mug.
Oh, very good.
All right. All right. Well, the final question is a little offbeat here. The stock market has lost about 800 points in the past 2 weeks. Is that an example of economic terrorism?
Only by Dow Jones, I should think. I do not pretend to in 1994 I published Debt of Honor, in which I talk about economic terrorism and taking down the stock market, which I found in one day of research up in New York was a very easy thing to do. But then I was told later by a director of the National Security Agency that until my book came out, they had trouble convincing people that the stock market could be attacked electronically, but since my book came out, they had people listening to them, so maybe I helped a little bit. Remember that war is both a political and a psychological act. You destroy an enemy not so much by killing all his soldiers, but by creating in his mind a doubt that his soldiers can perform for him. That's why you try to kill off leaders, because you disrupt command and control. You create a sense of loss within the enemy community, and they come apart more easily. Economic warfare, like attacking the banking system, for example, the trading system, would be more of a psychological attack than a physical attack, necessarily. I mean, all it's going to happen is some electrons are moving back and forth in copper wire or fiber optic cable. So, is it possible? Yeah, I know it's possible because I gamed it out. Is it really scary? Not if we keep our heads straight. I mean, Wall Street can come completely unglued tomorrow. They're still going to be making cars in Detroit. They're still going to be making steel in Pittsburgh. They're still going to be growing wheat in Kansas. And you can drive a car or build a building with steel I-beams and eat bread without the stock market. Attack would be disquieting and psychologically damaging to us, but as long as we have proper leadership from a guy living 2 blocks from here, which is, leadership's a hard thing to do, but if he does his job right and says, okay, ladies and okay, my fellow Americans, and this happened in Debt of Honor, they're still making cars in Detroit, they're still making steel in Pittsburgh, and they're still growing wheat in Kansas. What has changed? Answer, nothing. So wars like that are psychological rather than physical, and the solutions to such problems are psychological rather than physical.
Thank you.
Yep. You have your way?
I'd like to thank you. Thank you for coming tonight, Mr. Clancy, and special thanks to Penny Washington for helping organize tonight's dinner, as well as National Press Club staff members Kate Goggin, Joanne Booz, Pat Nelson, Melanie Ebdo-Dermott, and Howard Rothman for organizing tonight's dinner. I have 2 announcements. One is that Mr. Clancy will not be signing books after the dinner tonight.
I did it already.
Did it already? The other is that please stay seated while Mr. Clancy is escorted from the ballroom. Thank you.
Thank you.